Good morning. Good morning. Would members of the Public Works and Infrastructure Committee please report to Committee Room 1 for quorum? Lee's not here. He's running late.
What
Is
room are we
Councillor
in?
Carmichael
One?
Graham?
She's running late.
Call for quorum.
Oh, you
I can
called
call
out?
again. Good morning. Good morning. Would members of the Public Works and Infrastructure Committee please report to Committee Room 1 for quorum?
We're going to get started. Councillor Mamalidi.
Somebody needs to pull
Well, it's not going to be. Thank you, Mayor Tory, for joining us. We really appreciate you being here to help us get over this hurdle. Hopefully, you'll only have to be here a couple of minutes because we appreciate how busy you are. Okay, welcome everyone. Happy to see a full house today. We've got the mayor with us here just temporarily to ensure that we don't lose quorum and that we can move ahead with our meeting. So I'd like to call the meeting officially to order. It's the Public Works and Infrastructure Committee meeting, and I want to welcome our committee members, especially Mayor Tory, and visiting committee members. We have 9 big items on today's agenda, and if you're in the room with us, the screens at the back of the room provide real-time updates about where we are in the agenda and what's coming up next. For those watching online, you can follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. First questions for the committee. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, I'll move to confirmation of the minutes. Could I have someone to move the minutes from our last meeting? Councillor Holyday. All in favor? Carried. Okay, now we're going to run through the agenda very quickly. And we have deputations, several on some of these items before us. Mayor Tory, thank you for being here. You can actually go on with your real business because we've got our councillor here now, so we've got quorum. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you saving the day.
Isn't this real business?
Absolutely it is, but he's got real business. Okay, so we're going to run through the agenda very quickly. We've got a lot of people who would like to have our ear today. As you can see, the deputation list is very lengthy. Right now we're looking at about 8 to 9 hours, so we need to move quickly as we can, but also give these items their day in the light. You've got something for me? Okay, so the first item is amendment to purchase order number 6037278 for engineering services for construction contract administration for the P building upgrade and odor control project at Ashbridges Bay Treatment Plant. Moved by Councillor Holyday. All in favor? That carries. Next item, PW 24.2, amendment to purchase orders number 6041805 for truck loading biofilter upgrades at Ashbridges Bay Treatment Plant. Contract number 15 ECS MI 01AB. Does anybody like to move that or hold that item? Councillor Carmichael Greb is moving that item. All in favor? That is moved. PW 24.2. Utility locate cuts for business improvement areas as required by the Ontario Underground Infrastructure Nomination Act. I will move to adopt that. Yes.
Just, I won't hold this up. I will say that while I'm very skeptical in terms of what's going on, I'll let it go in hopes to make sure that I think things will be done properly with respect to this.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor? Carried. I moved it. Councillor Mamalidi just had a few words he wanted to say on that, but that carries. PW 24.4, improving accountability in the utility cut process. There's speakers for that item, so I will hold that in my name. I also would like to say a few words of thanks to staff on this because I think it's a great news story. PW 24.5, speed limit on Bayview Avenue from Pottery Road, northerly intersection to River Street ramp. I understand we have a quick amendment on this. Councillor Holyday.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is to substitute the word northerly to southerly in intersection of Pottery Road.
All those in favor? That carries. The next item is screen. Oh, item as amended. No, the clerk needs that. Item as amended. That carries. I'm going to give that to the clerk. Thank you. The next item is Green Streets Technical Guidelines. This is PW 24.6. There's speakers on this item, so I will hold that in my name. And PW 24.7, Preparing Toronto for Electric Vehicles. There's a hold on that as well. Speakers on that item. Also an exciting item, I think. PW 24.8, Freight and Goods Movement Strategy Framework. Would like to move to adopt that.
Speakers.
Oh, I'm sorry, speakers. Thank you, Councillor Lee. PW 24.9, Bloor Street West Bike Lane Pilot Project Evaluation. That is got a lot of speakers. Yeah, so Councillor Mamalidi has a motion on this.
I do, Madam Chair, and it's not to slight the rest of the agenda. I just think that this is a huge issue, and I would like to try to deal with it first as a committee, so I'd like to move that we deal with this first on the agenda. And then there's the speakers who have no speakers who have not pre-registered be allowed to register to speak for item PW 24.9 until 10 a.m. on October the 18th, which is today, after which no further registration is allowed and speakers list will be closed. That the length of public presentations be limited to 3 minutes. The questions of speakers by members of council be limited to 3 minutes as well, with 1 round of questions per member. And I move these just to expedite the process as well. There's a lot of people that want to speak. Big issue, and I hope we can deal with it first, and also agree with this motion.
Okay, so we have a motion before us. We also have a motion that is not before us suggesting we move this item to the top of the agenda. I will just advise the committee that you see that we have PW 24.4, PW 24.6, PW 24.7 and 8 all have speakers on those items, including PW 24.9. So there are 4 sets of speakers on the other items. We've been able to deal with some items off the top of the agenda, which is good, but we still have a number of items before us.
We do, Madam Chair. The logic for me is this is a very contentious issue, and it's not fair to the citizens of Toronto to have to watch until midnight on this issue in terms of what this committee wants to do with it. We should be dealing with it first so that people can watch and see what's happening, as opposed to what I think is maybe the agenda here, and that's to kind of hide it from the rest of the city of Toronto.
And then we'll vote on this one separately. So first.
Okay, so I'm just being advised by the clerk that a motion's been put forward to adopt the agenda with this modification, to change the order of the agenda. So she's asking me to actually state that and then have a vote on it. Unless the committee has anything to say, I don't know if you want to go straight to a vote. Councillor Lee.
I will not be voting to move this item to the top because the other speakers have to wait until midnight on the other items. You know, if this is important, then they have to stay until midnight. But that's the last item on the agenda. But the other speakers are very few, So I think it's important to deal with the others first and come and leave this as the last. So I won't be voting to move this to the top.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Would the committee like to move to a vote? Okay, all those in favor of adopting modifying the agenda as proposed by Councillor Mamalidi. All those in favor? 1.
Can I get it recorded, please?
A recorded vote.
All those in favor of changing the order of the agenda to deal with item 9 first? Councillor Mamalidi. All those opposed? Councillor Carmichael-Greb, Councillor Holliday, Councillor Robinson, Councillor Lee. That motion fails. On the motion before you on the screen from Councillor Mamalidi.
Yeah. Okay, so we have the motion in front of us is, well, I think it's already been described, but we're cutting off the speaker list at 10 a.m., which is usual course, and we're limiting the presentations to 3 minutes, and also the questions of the presenters.
All those in favor?
All those in favor? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. I also, before we just delve into our first item, I have some good news from the Waste Management Group, and I want to share with you these beautiful awards that have been won by our division that we represent. So I just want to take 2 minutes to say how proud we are to announce that the city is recently recognized on the international stage, not local, not national, but international stage, for innovation in solid waste management. This year, the city was honored with 2 Solid Waste Association of North America Excellence Awards. These prestigious awards recognize outstanding solid waste programs and facilities that advance the practice of environmental and economically sound solid waste management and demonstrate effective use of technologies. The city won a gold award in the Integrated Solid Waste Management System category for the long-term waste management strategy, an important roadmap that will guide waste management in Toronto over the next 30 to 50 years. A bronze award in the landfill management category for Green Lane Landfill, the city's state-of-the-art facility that uses innovative technologies to provide safe, not staff, I'm thinking about staff and how amazing they are, to provide safe, effective, and environmentally sustainable disposal of Toronto's residual waste. So I want to congratulate our solid waste staff, our team. I can't say enough about this group. They're so passionate and committed to what they do, and you don't always see that. It's not necessarily visible because they're behind the scenes, but I have to say this division is really, they are excellent, and they deserve these awards. So congratulations to them. If they want to come forward and we'll present, we'll do a little photo op. Maybe we'll do it in the horseshoe. Management team. No. You abandoned us. Oh, you're out. You don't get to participate in the fun. Okay, there's no all right, congratulations everyone. Okay, upward and onward. So we're going to start with our first item. Just before that, I do want to recognize we lost a Canadian icon. And I think everybody, we're all grief-stricken by this loss across our nation. And I hope that all of us, and I know all of us, will keep his family, Gord Downey's family, in our hearts today and forever, I hope. So I just wanted to make mention of that. We're now going to be moving to our first item, which is 24.4, improving accountability in the utility cut process. And we have a couple speakers on that, if they could come forward. So the first speaker is Hamish Wilson. No, it's not. It's Kathy McDonald. It's Kathy McDonald. And 2 more have been added. Mitt and Leanne will follow Kathy. Oh, are you going to do it together? Oh, excellent. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. So welcome. If you don't know the drill, you just make sure the mic's on in front of you.
Yes.
And you keep an eye on this clock right there to make sure you're...
Yes, we will endeavor to keep this within shorter than our 15 combined minutes. And we have some posters that we have given you that I hope you all have. And we're hoping that those will go on your walls of your offices to remind you of what is happening to our public space and our public streets. We're really here today, and we thank you for listening to us on this busy day, to ask you for a deferral of the universal equipment guidelines that are before you for approval today. And the reason for that is that we, in July, met with Barbara Gray, Greg Lintern, Councillor Wong Tam, and a number of senior staff, including the Senior Director of Transportation Services. We had what we thought was a very productive meeting to discuss the issues that we have with the many public utilities that are appearing on our sidewalks and in our parks or beside our parks. And we thought we had a cooperative dialogue going, and were promised that we would be able to review these guidelines with staff before they were presented to you for approval. As you can appreciate, they're quite complicated and complex, and we were quite shocked to see that they were actually on this agenda and that we had not seen them. So we have attempted, and Leanne is going to go over some of her specific concerns that we've found so far, but we are asking that this item be deferred for 1 month. Councillor Wong Tam has kindly already scheduled a meeting with staff and with Ms. Gray to go over them. But we will tell you a little bit more details about why. If you look at that poster in front of you at the top right corner, you will see a picture postcard view of the church at Lytton Park. It's a beautiful church directly across the street from a heritage home. And the box that you can see in front of it is approximately about 19 feet wide with the bollards, the protective bollards that are there. Sorry, it's 15 feet wide and about 5 feet high. And it's quite offensive to be sitting where it is in front of the church's main entrance. In the bottom left corner, you will also see a huge box sitting in front of a very small park on the corner of McPherson and Avenue Road. There's 2 pictures of it, actually, one a before picture and the other after. So you can clearly see the problems that these are creating. The other pictures in front of you are installations near the corner of Bloor and Yonge and on Charles Street between Yonge and Avenue Road, right in the middle of our Yorkville sidewalks, and they're massive. Now, we feel that this should stop, and we have to find a way, and we think there are ways to ensure this does not continue. So I'll let Leanne give you some specifics around the guidelines as we see them at the moment.
Okay. All right. Good morning, councillors. Okay, so we've reviewed the guidelines, and we have found that they are confusing and inconsistent. We have written specific comments on the provision, and we filed them with you, so you should have them. While the objectives stated in the guidelines are good ones, the actual guidelines do not appear to address the objectives. For example, the stated objectives contain the following statements. To define the best practice for placement patterns and various techniques to best disguise or bury above-ground plant to provide minimal visual impact. And further, it goes on to say to develop better practices to reduce the amount, impact, and necessity of above-ground plant. We fail to see anything in the guidelines that requires proposed above-ground plant to be buried or that reduces the amount or necessity of such plant. In fact, the municipal consent requirements provide that applications or drawings that include proposed above-ground plant shall include an explanation of the reason why this plant cannot be installed below ground. The guidelines, which are supposed to be supplemental to the MCRs, say only it is preferred that all equipment installations be below ground grade level. So this seems to actually weaken the language in the MCR as opposed to strengthening it or clarifying it. The MCRs provide that and this is a specific quote, "In general, more scrutiny will be used in reviewing applications to install above-ground plant on major or minor arterial streets or within the downtown central area as defined in the Toronto official plan. The guidelines do not adequately deal with the downtown or midtown or other areas where property lots are generally smaller, denser, and there are no boulevards between the sidewalk and street. We believe the guidelines should deal with such lots in considering the placement of above-ground installations. Further, the guidelines do not deal with mixed-use areas. Are they residential or are they commercial? We don't know. Our view is that no above-ground installations should be permitted in residential areas or on our sidewalks in major commercial areas. The guidelines do specify on page 6 under general placement practices that no above-ground plant will be placed in a manner which is in plain sight of a window display door, unless the owner or occupant provides written consent. We believe that this concept is a good one, but must apply to properties that are adjacent, beside, and across the street from the installation, especially where lots are small and densely occupied areas. Our concern is that on page 8 of the guidelines, the concurrent sign-off in respect of an above-ground plant is only required from an adjacent property owner where the plant is fronting the property and not on the side of the property or opposite the property. Even the notification provisions are not broad enough. On page 8 of the guidelines, only the adjacent property owner is required to be notified, although in the paragraph just above, it says, quote, "all affected residences should be notified." This is another area where the MCRs are stronger than the guidelines. The municipal consent requirements specifically say the applicant shall provide written notification to all adjacent properties and all properties that will face or will have a line of sight to the proposed plan. So the guidelines are inconsistent with the municipal consent regulations. On page 11 of the guidelines, under design placement considerations, it says that large-scale above-ground structures must be placed on a flanking street for residential property. In the downtown, an installation on a flanking street may in fact be even closer to a residence. This guideline obviously doesn't take into consideration smaller lots in denser neighborhoods. This is also a problem in densely populated mixed-use areas. The provisions dealing with parks on page 12 talks about placement in parks and when a park supervisor must be notified. Among other things, we feel that above-ground installations should not be installed in smaller parks, and there should be a requirement for the park supervisor, the councillor, and local residents associations to sign off before any such installation is approved. As you can see, we have outlined some of the inconsistencies with the guidelines, both internally and with the municipal consent requirements. There are more that we have not covered. We do not believe they properly consider dense neighborhoods with smaller lots or adequately address the effect of these various large installations on our busy sidewalks in commercial areas. We are therefore asking for a deferral of consideration of these guidelines. Thank you.
Kathy, there's just...
Okay, yeah, so I'm Kathy McDonald. I'm here representing Fontra. I'm the co-chair of Federation of North Toronto Residents Association. We have discussed the issues of the above-grade installations and participated in discussions with the city about how to develop guidelines that will protect our streets and parks, and are certainly happy to participate in further discussions to make this work. We strongly support the deferral today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for the speakers? Okay, seeing none, I think we have a motion that the clerk is just typing up. Any questions of staff? Councillor Wong Tam.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I won't take too long. I recognize there are a lot of people here to speak to other matters. Just a question to staff. Recognizing that the guidelines are before us, will we be able to sort of meet the requirements of coordinating with other bodies if we were to defer this matter for one meeting cycle and have the guidelines brought back here after there's a conversation with the affected stakeholders?
Through you, Madam Chair, we would be able to accommodate that, yes.
So the 1 month deferral is agreeable.
We're happy to meet again, whether it's moving out a month or prior to council. We're happy to do that. Yes.
Thank you very much.
So I'll also ask a similar question, because we have a motion before us to actually move it forward, but to identify the organizations that would like to be consulted. So I think Councillor Holyday is moving a motion to move it forward, but asking staff to consult with the parties that are in the room today and others to address some of their concerns. Is that agreeable?
Yes, we're able to do that.
Okay. All right. So, Councillor Holyday, do you want to move the motion?
So the committee is going to request the General Manager of Transportation Services to consult with the two organizations that spoke to us today. And if there is additional reporting that is available, the General Manager can bring that before Council and include that in her report to us. And I will just make the comment that I really appreciate the time and energy that you've put into this. One of the Genesis motions, there's a few of them in this report, was one that I wrote in 2015.
Yes, we noticed that, yes.
It's, the addition of infrastructure is very, very sensitive. I know in particular my part of the city as well. And I think a lot of councillors see this as a long time coming with these guidelines, and we're really supportive of them. I think they're going to be a big help on the city. So we want to keep them moving, but we also appreciate the input that you have. And if there's any fine tuning that can be done between now and council, everyone's paying attention.
Well, we appreciate your...
I'm sorry. You can't speak at this time. Sorry.
Thank you.
Procedurally, you're not you're now. So you actually can take your seats. Thank you. I also want to just on another note say that this has been a long time coming. The fact that we don't have to now wait the freeze-thaw cycle. I think people are tired of seeing dark gray matter that is hard to traverse, and aesthetically it's unpleasing, and I'm sure people with mobility issues struggle with it at times. So I'm happy to see this addressed, and I think residents across the city will be cheering for this to see that we're fast-tracking these repairs. So on that note, we have a motion before us. It's up on the screen, and all those in favor? Against, that carries. Next item is PW. Item as amended. I'm sorry, I forgot that part. We got a full house on that one. So item as amended, and it now carries. Okay, now we're on to PW 24.6 Green Streets Technical Guidelines. Hamish, you're up first, and then Karen Buck, and then Darnell after that. You've got 5 minutes.
Yes, good morning. In some ways, even though it's a laudable report, it feels like this is a bit of a greenwash, because the direly needed environmental sustainability is not going to occur by rebuilding all of our streets and roads to a different set of standards. The greening of our roads and streets will only really come by figuring out how to adapt what we've already got in place and to change its function to transit, biking, and foliage and walking, for the foliage being for cooling and for rain absorption. So absolutely, it's good work to be thinking about how we can green our streets, but to actually really green them, we cannot replace everything that we've got. We've got to adapt. We've got to apply the 3 R's, the reduce and the reuse, not reduce to rubble and haul it away. We've got to really think how we can green our existing roads. So one of the things that would be really helpful is actually figuring out how much concrete is used each year in our road system. We don't have a clue. We're not interested in figuring out how much concrete is actually used within the city. And it's a very important thing for our greenhouse gas profile as well. Because as you make concrete, there's a need for cement. Cement requires the burning of limestone, so there's an extra amount of carbon dioxide emission from any use of cement and concrete. And it's substantial. So how much tonnage do we use each year in our roads and sidewalks and city projects? You don't have a clue, and quite honestly, I don't think there's that much interest in developing that figure. And another thing is that, for instance, sometimes we use more exotic materials. I don't know if granite is always locally sourced. It's a hard material. We've got to actually think about the energy that's used in extracting it and hauling it to our city. The whole embodied energy and the resource of our existing road system as well is really substantial. And we sometimes look at the operating energy and the operating greenhouse gas emissions, but not so much the capital energy and the capital greenhouse gas emissions. And that's a significant oversight. The newer greenhouse gas accounting standards actually miss concrete as well. So that's really not okay. So how do we green our existing roads? Well, one of the things to do is maybe just try some paint, and that brings in bikes, of course. And I think if we actually had a good system of bike lanes marked with green paint, that'd be an excellent way of actually greening our roads. In some areas, for instance, on this portion of Davenport into DuPont here, I think it should be yellow paint because it's a substandard bike lane, just to mark it up a little bit more. And when we get into nasty things like this is on College Street maybe 2 summers ago, we need some green paint to mark the crossing over entries and exits. I do hope whoever the cyclist was survived all of this. This was really nasty, but that'd be a great thing to do in terms of actually having extra green paint and greening our roads. Green bike lanes are good as well, and it'll be lovely to see them in Scarborough, not just on Bloor. Going back to other issues of biking and greening our roads, how to absorb the water. Having a ponding and freeze-thaw cycle on in gutters and bike lanes is not okay at a certain point in time. So that's why we're given extra widths to make sure that we actually have that space to avoid these puddles. But in other areas, this is an old picture. This is actually really deadly dangerous in the Yonge Street underpass. There's seepage just under the tracks coming downhill. There's seepage from the escarpment of the groundwater out through the under the rail tracks so that you can get a real mound of ice. So you don't see it. That sort of thing is not okay. We need to make sure that there are actually symbols on the road to allow us to take the lane. Did I have a picture of, yes, one of the things that's done elsewhere, speaking of green, when they do a Cheryl, they actually put the green paint around, they put the bike symbol in a box. This is in Burlington. This is a really good example in some ways that we could do a lot more with simple paint to make the roads safer and greener for cyclists. And in terms of going on a road diet as well, in terms of the reduce option, a lower speed limit would actually be very helpful. This is a wonderful image from Spacing Magazine that shows the road consumption per mode. And yes, I'm just, the consumption of the public road space by speeding vehicles, the cars, is really incredible. So that's where we have to be going with our road diet, is to lower the speed limits to make sure that we actually have less congestion. Thank you.
Buck. Darnell Harris is next. Darnell, welcome. How are you?
Very well. Good morning,
You've got 5 minutes, Darnell, and if you can just keep your eye on this clock over here.
Of course. So thank you very much, Madam Chair. I definitely would laud the staff's effort in pulling together the Green Streets guidelines. What I'm here to speak about today is a small matter just in terms of best practice, which has not been so much incorporated into the guidelines. Mostly this, of course, applies to our suburban avenues, that being the general blind spot with trucks. So, of course, we have a lot of these going on Finch and a lot of those going across suburbs and employment areas. And as a result, really what you have is most of the people on the side of the road, however they're moving, are in fact in the blind spot of a massive multi-ton vehicle. So usually, of course, when we speak about mobility on streets, we speak about people walking, we speak about people getting around. However, it's not nearly dual as that. This is a more honest reality of what actually happens on our streets. And as Madam Chair noticed last year during the accessibility debate that was held here at City Hall, there are often people with mobility scooters, a lot of them, that use our streets, that go down, usually use the roads. They can't use the sidewalk because there's no suspension on those mobility vehicles that are used very often in York West and used very often in Don Valley and Etobicoke. I've met them myself, and really the issue, especially there for them, is the sidewalks have a lot of cracks. The end result is that every single half second jars their spine. So it's very important, therefore, that there is a pathway. Now, there is a best practice related to this that also makes more efficient use of road space while actually protecting taxpayers and reducing the cost of maintenance. And this would be this particular best practice, which is not listed in the Green Streets guidelines. Effectively, what you do is instead of having a barrier, empty space, you would instead have your green area, which you can plant a tree in, for example, or other things, but also serves as your stormwater collection. The other benefit of something like this is it drains well. So at no point during a storm do you have a plastic bag, as often happens, running into a drain, and then your entire sewer system is effectively dead. This way, this does not get swamped. It takes a lot more water, saves a lot more money because you don't have water unnecessarily flowing through the water treatment plants. So this, in fact, makes a much better way of dealing with, not really bike infrastructure, but mobility infrastructure to allow people to get through. So you have your stormwater planters, you have your pathway, and then you have your sidewalk. So there's no reason why, when we're talking about street reconstruction, this is not included as best practice. This particular picture is from Indianapolis. They have a 10-kilometer stretch on both sides of the road there. It's created over $1 billion in economic growth, and that's not counting the simple savings from not having your sewer break or not having, Finch wiped out and there's a massive gorge there. So that would be all. And I would thank Madam Chair for your time. Of course.
So you mentioned Finch a couple times.
Yes.
Do you live in the area?
I've worked and lived in know many folks in the area for years.
You've worked or you lived?
Worked.
You worked. Mm-hmm. Okay, so are you aware that that with some real pressure, even though in York West the LRT is not wanted, there's been some real dialogue on getting Metrolinx to change the scope of their bicycle paths along Finch Avenue. They're widening the road now, and the bike lanes that they have proposed are now off of the road. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware of that.
So is there a reason why you didn't mention that and used Finch as a negative on this?
No, I didn't. I wasn't using Finch as a negative. Oh. I was simply speaking to the reality of people along the road. The situation with the Metrolinx suggestion, for example, is it still puts all of these people in the blind spot of the trucks that are very common over there.
Right,
so
maybe, but in the community itself, there is a huge movement to take those people that you were talking about and bring them down the Humber to the downtown part of the city through the much safer venue, which is the Humber River. as well as the hydro corridor, right? Wouldn't that be better than using the roads and making it unsafe for those that want to ride a bike?
It's more than just people who want to ride a bike, because of course there's people with mobility scooters, and the ravine system is only suitable for certain times of the year. But as you know, of course, many people in the community make use of the businesses and places along the road where they both live and work and regularly shop, the malls in both areas. So it would be better for the community to have a design like this. And in fact, that's been a conversation that I've had very successfully with the community over the last couple of years. But I won't speak to that topic as it would be out of order.
No, I know, but you just mentioned something else, and that's all year round
Yes.
mobility.
Yes.
Are you saying that roads are ready for those in the winter?
I'm saying that this sort of design is suitable in the winter. It's worked very well in Indianapolis for the last 10 years and saves a lot of money because it's permeable and therefore there's no waste and ponding, as well as stormwater infrastructure is a lot cheaper to maintain than what's currently being proposed right now. That would be in the blind spot.
Councillor, and then we're going to move on to questions. Councillor Davis.
Of staff.
Of staff, yes, of course, of staff, yeah.
Thank you very much for this work. We've been waiting for it for some time. And so it's exciting to see that we now have a set of standards for how to develop green infrastructure in our right-of-way. What I don't see is an implementation strategy, and I presume you have to develop one to ensure that these guidelines are actually being applied in our capital works. Will there be an implementation strategy?
Through you, Madam Chair, we are in fact moving forward with an implementation strategy in addition to having some demonstration projects that we're going to be developing next year. We're in the process of working closely with ECS and Toronto Water on those streets where they have basement flooding, and we're doing local roadway resurfacing to look for opportunities. We're also working with our colleagues in ECS to update the guidelines and standards for roads related to some of these elements that are in the guidelines so we can make them more straightforward to deliver. And then we also have a 4-division steering committee meeting that's meeting to work through all of these issues in terms of projects and policy and guidance direction so that we can move relatively quickly once we get into 2018 and we start moving on these projects.
So it would be great if you shared the implementation plan with us. I know there are great expectations amongst a lot of councillors to see green infrastructure. Could you report out on that implementation strategy for us?
Through you, yes, we'd happy to do a briefing note on that.
To report, that's great. I did want to ask Mr. DiGeronimo, the basement flooding projects, and in total, how much are we spending per year on basement flooding projects?
Through you, Madam Chair. Annually, the budget for basement flooding projects is about $65 million.
So I know that the EAs in the first 35 neighborhoods did not contain green infrastructure or an assessment of opportunities for green infrastructure. Are we now building that into the scope of all of the EAs in the basement flooding areas?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct. The initial EAs had limited look at green infrastructure, so very small opportunity to look at that time. This document will be used as part of the design process because the design work is coordinated through our Engineering Construction Services Group. We're informing also the EA, so the environmental assessment stage will have the document to look at options as well.
Okay, so you will know, and Mr. DeAndrea will know, Ms. Gray may not, but I've been trying to get the boulevards that are asphalt in the City of Toronto, at least in my ward, replaced with grass or something permeable. And it seems that almost every time there's a construction contract, they put back what was there. And it's been difficult to get them greened. And I'm wondering if we pass these standards, will we see asphalt boulevards in all of our next construction projects greened?
Through you, Madam Speaker, I'll start, and then perhaps we will get General Manager of Transportation to step in, because part of the things
If
we
they
needed
need a
to
minimum
change-
width, I know.
So the short answer will be not every location will be applicable for these standards. The issue that we had is we had old standards that said you would go to asphalt or concrete, whatever the material was at that time. What this design standard does is it allows you to look at, on a site-specific basis, whether it's applicable to use some of the green standards. You have to look at soil conditions, number of factors.
I just want to know, in our road project, transportation services projects, in the, say, the next construction season.
That's why I was handing it over to
2018,
the General Manager.
Will we see the greening of boulevards and the replacement of asphalt where it meets the standards?
Through you, Madam Chair, we certainly have, as I mentioned, a number of demonstration projects that we're working on in the 2018 budget. I think the first piece to do is to look at where, especially green infrastructure projects, actually are going to have the ability to be successful. And so, as my colleague in Toronto Water indicated, we look first at the site conditions and infiltration as to whether that will work, as opposed to just grass where there was asphalt, that we would actually have a green infrastructure solution. And in the locations where they will work and we are moving forward with the project, the guidelines would then give us the direction to look at implementing something different than we would be just putting back asphalt. But as he mentioned, those projects that are currently in motion, especially those for 2018 that are not on the demonstration list, will continue, and we'll try to catch the ones in the future in the design stages early on so that we can have a better outcome.
Councillor Holyday.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In Etobicoke, the west end of the city, there's a bylaw in place that compels residents to look after the green space on the boulevard outside of their home. So if you have a lawn and there's this imaginary line across the lawn that demarks the road right-of-way, and then there's usually space, green, maybe some plantings, and then the actual asphalt surface, maybe a sidewalk in between, that bylaw compels the resident to look after that, and people do, they comply. How does this work in the inner city where we might be installing some green infrastructure, and under the same token or the same concept, if people in certain parts of the city are looking after what's already kind of green infrastructure, will we also compel the residents and the businesses and people that face the right-of-way where we might be installing plantings in lieu of concrete, will we be expecting them to help maintain it?
Through you, Madam Chair, under the bylaw, yes, we would. It would work the same way. And one of our implementation pieces that we continue to work through, and one of the reasons why the demonstration projects will be so important in 2018, is on replacement and more significant maintenance having to do with the drainage facility. That will be something that the city will address. But in terms of day-to-day maintenance of the plantings, that would work under the bylaw the same way that it does with grass or other plantings as it does today.
So one of the things I do worry about is the life cycle cost of the green infrastructure. I'm very excited about it, by the way, but the life cycle cost is something that could potentially be very large for the city. Are we prepared to enforce that bylaw if need be, if not everyone is stepping up to the plate and looking after that green infrastructure? And I appreciate there's a difference between trimming a tree and just simply collecting garbage or weeding or keeping this green infrastructure well maintained.
Through you, we are prepared to enforce it. I'll also say that one of the benefits of this program is that we really do a good look at what plant material has the most impact and typically has the least maintenance requirements. So you can really get a good palette of plant material that hopefully won't be a particular maintenance burden, but still creates the ecological component that you're looking for.
Okay, Councillor Mamalady.
I just want to carry on with that line of questioning, because I thought on one hand, you've got Councillor Holyday asking questions with respect to the difference between two areas of the city and how we maintain green space on boulevards. And I'm not sure I heard the answer. I think he was asking, are we going to be looking at funding through our budget maintenance of these kinds of downtown initiatives as opposed to what's happening now in the city, in the suburb area, which is the ratepayers are responsible for picking up the tab of maintaining those boulevard areas. Is that going to be part of this recommendation? The downtown be maintained through the City of Toronto budget, and then uptown, it's the responsibility of the ratepayers?
Through you, Madam Chair, the distinction on who maintains is not being done geographically. It's actually being done by placement of the green features. So if it is within the road right-of-way and fronting on a property, regardless of where it is in the city, it would apply accordingly to the way the General Manager of Transportation indicated the homeowner would be looked at to maintain that.
And the business owner on main arterial roads?
Now, when we're looking at other locations like arterial roads, or if there's placement of a feature that is away from homes, maybe near a BIA or maybe near a corner or a space that's public open space now, that's where then the city would likely have to maintain. And that's why we're looking at some of the issues of who would be maintaining it. Would it be a park's responsibility if it's near a park area, or would it be a transportation?
You recognize that currently on main arterial roads, at least in my area of the city, that the city doesn't cut the boulevards, that it's subject to the businesses or any owners of any property adjacent to those main arterial properties. So that just, it sounds like there may be a difference in who actually picks up the cost if this goes through.
Through you, the maintenance piece that I was referring to is the drainage function of that green infrastructure, not the planting function of that green infrastructure. So that's another piece that we continue to work through. If the drainage function is compromised over the long term, that's something that we would address, because we're putting it in part because it has a drainage component to it. The landscaping piece would be maintained as under the bylaw like it currently is today, either by the homeowner or by a BIA.
So the cutting of the grass, for instance, Councillor Davis gets her wish. The cutting of the grass maintains the responsibility of the homeowner adjacent to that property.
That's correct.
Okay. What is the definition of green space on these areas? I mean, we had somebody talk about bicycle lanes. Does this report in a hidden way talk about bicycle lanes being put in under a different definition now?
Through you, this really doesn't refer to bicycle facilities. It refers to green infrastructure, which really has a drainage component and a planting component.
It's really got nothing to do with one of the deputations that came forward to speak about bicycle lanes.
Well, part of it around the green infrastructure and the type of facility, the swale that was showed on the screen was the type of facility that would be in the guidelines. The just general bicycle facilities are not covered.
Stormwater management.
It's a stormwater management tool.
Okay.
So no, bicycle facilities are not part of the report.
All right. Okay, so, and lastly, council, in its wisdom, after some heavy-duty fighting by some of us, shelved the whole roof tax component to what the agenda is down here at City Hall. Is this, does this report somehow keep that alive and recommend in any way that the roof tax come back and haunt everybody in the city again?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, it has nothing to do with that issue.
So there's nothing in this report that says, that the staff can point to if this goes through, that says council has endorsed this report and therefore the roof tax is now born again?
Through you, Madam Chair, this report talks about when we do construction, we look at different methods of, in right locations, of the design of those public features that we're building. It has nothing to do with the financing component. It's only the design elements.
So we won't be able, or staff won't be able to say you've passed this report today at council next month, therefore we are going to implement a roof tax.
Through you, Madam Chair, no, the funding for these types of initiatives would come from the existing capital budgets that have already been identified for those capital works.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question. I welcome this report. Thank you to the staff that worked very hard on this. I'm just wondering about Councillor Davis's comments. So as much as I'm a big fan of greening things, she was talking about, you know, finding areas where we can green, especially along roadways. But how does that impact cyclists who certainly can't use grass to traverse the city, or people with mobility issues?
Through you, well, to you, Madam Chair, I think this is part of the issue is as we look at implementation of these, it's very site-specific implementation. And I mentioned the part about actual drainage facilities so that the soils that are beneath the surface of the roadway have to be able to absorb the water. And that depends a lot on the soil content and whether there's a lot of clay there, and then it doesn't absorb. So our friends in Toronto Water have a pretty comprehensive map that indicates where the best sort of receiving sites are for green infrastructure. So we use that as sort of initial screen. And then in terms of the overall functions of the roadway and what facilities go there, this is just one component piece. So looking at the boulevard, if it's replacement like for like, and we find that it would be a good site for green infrastructure from a drainage perspective. If we find that there's a conflict between expansion of a boulevard or changes there and other features of the roadway, that would be something we would address through design. And it's again one of the reasons why the demonstration projects that we're doing in 2018 are a really good way for us to figure out how to integrate these standards into our guidelines into our existing set of tools.
Okay, thank you very much.
I do apologize. There was one other question. It's just to kind of clarify.
Can you be quick, please?
Yeah, very quick. This isn't an attempt as well to try to get the BIAs to pick up the cost for these ventures as well. The BIAs spend a lot of money on
Different report.
boulevards, and if they're going to start having to pick up the cost of drainage because it's one of those policies that's within their jurisdiction, are you suggesting or going to be suggesting in any way that if this goes through, the BIAs pick up the cost to this?
Through you, Madam Chair, this tool will be used whenever the city is initiating its works within public lands or its own road right-of-way, as opposed to other design guidelines that we have in place already, whenever a third party initiates it. So if we are going to do work in an area that involves a BIA and also involves transportation and water, because usually we try to bundle that work together, we will apply the guidelines and look at it. And if it makes sense to do it in that area, it may be suggested to be looked at. So I can't rule it out that it wouldn't come up in future conversations of designing that right-of-way, but there'll be parts of the city where it won't make sense to do this because the soils aren't a good location for it.
So the answer to my question is yes.
Yeah, it might occur.
We are now looking at a possible policy that has the BIAs now looking at incorporating yet another cost to themselves based on a policy we're about to pass. And many of the BIAs just can't afford these kinds of costs. They've got their infrastructure policies in place, and now that this changes, they're going to have to go back to the drawing boards and look at more money to help pay for these.
That's your last question.
So through you, these are just guidelines, and if the BIAs were not interested in implementing them, then we would not be moving forward with implementation. So they're really just design guidelines and another set of tools. There might be some BIAs that are quite interested, but it would not be something that we would demand get done or force upon a group, especially because, again, it is the adjacent property owner or entity that's going to do the maintenance. So we would work closely with whoever was going to be have that frontage.
Just so we're clear, guidelines are not mandatory, but we ask every project to look at the guidelines to see if there's an opportunity, if it makes sense in that location.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move to speakers.
I'll speak.
Councillor Lee, do you have a motion you want to move? Or so Councillor Mamalady, why don't you start? Councillor Mamalady, Well, please proceed then.
Well, I
We
wanna-
have a lot of people waiting to speak
Yeah,
today.
no, well, I made that point earlier, and.
Yes,
and
you
I-
did.
And I, for one, now have
I-
found out that the possibilities of BIAs having to
excuse
spend
me,
money.
I'd like to
I'd like
speak,
to,
Chair.
I'd like to try to come up with a motion that protects the BIA.
Okay, so Councillor Davis, if you could go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to first say congratulations to Toronto Water, to Transportation Services, and to Planning, who were all involved in developing the guidelines and in proceeding with some of the demonstration projects that have been great success. One in particular in Councillor Fletcher's ward, which is featured in many of the pictures in the report that's before us. Now that we have the standards, and I think what we really need is an implementation strategy so that we have an idea about how and when these projects will be implemented across the city. The first thing I want to say is, as we see the number of basement flooding projects unfold, we are going to build infrastructure, green infrastructure, as part of those projects, and that's great. Initially, they weren't necessarily part of the solutions that were being identified by the consultants doing those projects. But for the projects that the other projects are all of the road work and Toronto Water work that gets done every year in the public realm that affects the right-of-way. And as many, many municipalities have greater and greater experience with new and innovative ways to capture stormwater, Toronto has to as well. And in fact, we are catching up. There are many municipalities across Europe and North America who are trying a range of infrastructure strategies such as rain gardens, bioswales, other ways to prevent water from going into our storm system. We have to be able to capture as much rainfall through natural infiltration as we can. And as the city becomes more and more paved over, asphalted over, we have to step back and say, where can we build and replace hard surfaces with better means of capturing stormwater? They can be beautiful. They can be structural. But there are ways and new techniques, and they are embedded in these guidelines that we should be using on our streets. No, I don't think I don't think that an unaccepting or uncooperative BIA would be the place where we would want to do one of these projects. And I can say absolutely, we have some experience with that in the East End. There has to be a mechanism where the BIA must sign an agreement that they are interested and willing to be part of a pilot project that puts green infrastructure in the BIA area. If the BIA is not cooperative and does not sign an agreement that they are a willing partner in greening, putting in new tree pits, putting in other infiltration measures, then we should not move forward to do this kind of work in those areas. The reason I speak about boulevards is because we have many, many asphalt boulevards in the public right-of-way. And right now, and along streets, and right now, if there is a road resurfacing project going on and sidewalks being replaced, that asphalt just gets replaced. Even if you beg, please put green in there, you are doing it outside of the terms and conditions for that contract. So we've got to find ways that we can green opportunistically where it works, and we've got to figure out how to make this implement how to implement these guidelines in all of the projects that we do in the City of Toronto. So I hope you'll support the recommendation. It simply is for a report on implementation, and the general manager, in answer to my question, said that she was happy to report back.
Okay,
and I asked her about the date and Q2, so I think Councillor Lee is going to move it.
Yeah.
Ask her to report on an implementation strategy in Q2 of 2018.
Thank you. Councillor Mamalady, you're next. Oh, Councillor McMahon, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand waving. Go ahead.
So I want to commend staff for this report and all the work they've done on it, and it's a move forward, progressive move forward. We're all worried about the state of the world these days, especially climate change and what's going on down south, and also what happened to Toronto this past summer when we lost our island for a chunk of the summer and my beach. So I am thrilled to announce that we have, I think it's the first ever major stormwater demonstration site. I think Fairford was the baby sister to this, but at Coxwell and Dundas coming soon, thanks to, Sheila Boudreau's baby, but Patrick and the team over there as well. So at Coxwell and Dundas. So it's a great partnership with Toronto Water, the Royal Ontario Museum. I believe Carleton University is involved. I think there's an organization in Paris who's following it. First Nations schools doing some Indigenous art for us, and the local developers involved. So stay tuned. I will invite you all down to see it in 2018, and hopefully we can roll that kind of infrastructure out across the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Councillor Mamalady.
I'm going to move that the City Council confirm no additional costs will be incurred by BIAs for the implementation of the Green Streets Technical Guidelines. Madam Chair, I think some of my questions were answered earlier with respect to what I may have considered some of the hidden language perhaps in reports. And I see it similar to, my work in bringing the panda to the City of Toronto. Cuddly, beautiful, everybody loves it. They want to be able to pet it and touch it until the panda rips your arms off. And some of these reports are just like that. The headings are wonderful, they look beautiful, everybody says we should be doing them, until it's time for the city staff to go and enforce the guidelines and the policies. And so we have to watch on behalf of some of the folks in the City of Toronto who are working really hard during the day and aren't able to make it to these committees with some of the language that goes into these things. And what was confirmed earlier, believe it or not, with all the dialogue in my questioning, was that, in fact, the BIAs would end up being charged for these guidelines. And if they're not, then they're put in a horrible position of not wanting to work with the city. And BIAs are not allowed to do that either. I don't know if you know that, but BIAs are not allowed to contradict any of the policies at the City of Toronto under our agreements with them. So what would have happened is, if this motion doesn't go through, is that our staff would go out and enforce them, these kinds of measures, and say to them, if you're looking at redoing a part of your neighborhood with your stones or your green initiatives, now that the City of Toronto has implemented this new policy, you now have to make sure it's drained, and you're going to pick up the cost to that. And so that becomes a very expensive measure to most of the BIAs that cannot afford these kinds of costs. So that's the reason for my motion. I think that someone just needs to protect what was told to us earlier, and that's to make sure that nobody goes out and tries to enforce something after these guidelines are passed. I agree with many of the things that people are saying with respect to the need to drain. Absolutely. I would support, and I'm going to support, new guidelines with respect to this. I don't want, however, for any of these reports to bring out a flavor and language that has staff come out and say, well, you passed it, now we have to pay for it, now we have to implement another tax for it. If we're prepared to move in this direction through policy, then we're prepared to absorb whatever it is under our budget to cover the costs of these things. I'm afraid that that's not going to happen. I'm afraid that others are going to be borne with the cost of the policies that we're creating even today. So that's really what I'm most concerned about with respect to this, and I hope that you can support this particular initiative. And given what we just passed earlier, Madam Chair, with respect to work being done on boulevards and how BIAs are upset at what's going on with the costs of our new policies and what that means to them, I think this is just only fair that someone protect those agencies from something that might cost them a fortune.
Councillor Lee has a question for you.
Have you consulted with through you, Madam Chair, have you consulted with the BIAs about what you're moving here?
The question is, have we consulted with the BIAs with respect to what we're moving here?
Right. That's why I'm asking.
Not this local councillor. The question is of staff. Have they consulted with all the BIAs on this initiative and make them aware that there's a potential for them to have yet another cost? It's not about me. Why are you making it about me?
Because you're moving this.
It's got nothing to do with me. It has to do with the policy.
But,
it has to do with
if this gets voted down, will you, we should be consulting with the BIAs before we approve anything. Because what happens if the BIA wants improvements? By moving this, that means they don't have to pay for any improvement they're requesting.
Under this policy?
Yes, under this policy. They don't have, if they want something more than what the city is willing to do, this policy then doesn't require them to pay for anything of it, any improvements.
Yeah, I'm not sure you're getting how the BIAs work, Councillor Lee. The BIAs are an agency of the city. The BIAs are structured for a cost, a half and half cost with the city on anything they do with infrastructure. What's happened lately is the city changes its policies on the type of material that they're now supposed to use, and they're picking up the huge costs of that. This is no different. We're about to venture into a whole new technique on how to drain on boulevards that the BIAs are responsible for. So when they're ready to do other work, we're going to now be telling them, you have to pay the costs of the drain, a new policy on how to drain, and it's very expensive. So you're trying to make it a Mamalidi issue. This is about us having to go back, and please move the motion to have them to defer it and have them speak to the BIAs as well on their views on this. I don't think they've done that.
Okay, any other questions? Does anybody have questions? So I have a question for Councillor Mamalidi. It's a pretty broad blanket statement you're making. I think Councillor Lee's alluded to it, that we do partner often with the BIAs. I think all of us around the table are huge fans of our BIAs. They make our city vibrant. So I think this is a bit of a sweeping statement to make off the top of an initiative without consultation with the BIAs, because they may actually look at this as a great opportunity to work with the city in greening I know they like their streetscapes to be green and to have gardens and trees and florals. So my question to you is, why would you make such a broad sweeping statement without consulting with Tabia or the local BIAs?
Why haven't we talked to Tabia before this report came out, Madam Chair? Why are we about to pass another policy without having to speak to the BIAs? If you would prefer that we hold off and speak to them first before, and it becomes a part of this dialogue, then I'm okay with that before we pass any policies. I'm totally okay with that.
Okay, and any other speakers on this item? Councillor Holyday?
Do you want me to make that amendment?
We're working on something for you.
Always make sure I've got a mic here. Thanks, Madam Speaker. I'm looking in the report. There's a really nice picture. I'll hold it up. It's of a boulevard. It's a busy street. It's got a nice hedge and some green trees. And I think to myself, yeah, I mean, that looks fantastic. It would be great if the city continued to transform and evolve, because it would just be a more livable place. But the thing that comes to mind, though, is who's going to look after that hedge? And I worry, you know, we struggle just filling in the potholes, scraping the snow off, trimming those trees. We struggle to keep up with that amount of maintenance, despite really good efforts, but there's a tremendous cost and a lot of resources, and we're going to add another layer on there. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but my point is this concept has existed in the suburbs for decades and decades and decades. There's enormous amounts of green spaces out there, and they're happily looked after. They're happily improved by the owners that abut those properties. So in my questions and what we talked about today, I think we brought it up, is I think councillors should be concerned about a double standard. To me, if we put a hedge in there, then the onus to look after that should fall to the adjacent property owner. They should be making sure the hedge in the right-of-way is well maintained, and it shouldn't then become a burden on the city. Now, there's a difference between digging up the substrate and the drainage bed and the large rocks and tiles that are in there. You know, that's a civil work, and that's probably something that the city would do cyclically as the road is rebuilt. I mean, that has to do with water drainage. That's our responsibility. But I just hope people aren't thinking about this, especially those that represent the downtown, thinking that, you know, that the city's now going to look after all this. Because other parts of the city step up to the plate, and they do that happily, and they do a good job with it. And so I guess maybe the concern is be careful what you wish for. That said, I think we're doing the right thing. Councillor Mammoliti has driven home a very good point. I'm not going to support his motion, but he makes a good point, and that is you've got to talk to the BIA and you've got to talk to the homeowner when we're implementing this infrastructure if we're going to put the onus on them to look after it. And I'm going to trust staff are going to work through that. This is a very comprehensive report, and I think it's a path forward, but that element should be introduced into it, that if we're going to do these plantings, if we're going to make these improvements, those that are benefiting most directly from those improvements should also be part of the process to help look after them. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Lee.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to be moving a motion.
Can you put it on the screen?
And these guidelines need a strategy to implement. So this is a request. Councillor Davis has asked me to do that, to report back on July 10th, 2018 on an implementation strategy for the Green Streets Technical Guidelines. And we've consulted with the General Manager of Transportation, and
too early.
He's okay with it.
I just wonder if that's too quick. I mean, that is literally around the corner.
Well, she says it's okay.
Is it okay? Does staff feel that timeline's okay? Okay.
I was actually putting, because that's the last meeting of next year.
Oh, right.
Right?
That's right.
Because it's only a half year.
Otherwise, we're into the next
And we recess after that.
Okay. All right, that's fine. There's a friendly amendment.
And anyways, and it's good to that we are bringing forward new standards, because even in my area, homeowners are putting things into the boulevards that not just lawn, not just grass, but I have to make sure they maintain it, as Councillor Holiday was saying, that it doesn't start to look messy. So other people have also cultivated vegetable gardens on the boulevard, but as long as they look nice and the neighbors are okay with it, it is something that I think we need to encourage people to do. You know, there's a naturalist that cultivates boulevard full of strawberries, wild strawberries. And he's enjoying the fruits of his labor. So I think this is good use of public space. And it's important that we keep maintaining our public infrastructure in such a way that looks good and is beneficial to the community that is surrounding it. So thank you very much for the hard work put into the technical guidelines, and I'll be supporting most of these amendments. I'm still thinking about Councillor Mammolidis.
Changing it. He's adapting.
Oh, he's changing it. He's modifying it. All right. And it could be supportable. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Lee. And there's a question about just having a quick friendly amendment from Councillor Holiday to your motion.
It may help, and if Councillor Mammoliti wants to suggest it, just insert, in addition to the reporting on the implementation, a consultation strategy for BIAs and affected homeowners as a friendly clause in there. I think the staff agreed that they could come back and talk to us about how they would do that.
You would like to amend Councillor Lee's motion?
Councillor Lee's, if that's helpful
Councillor
to
Lee, is that
Councillor Mammoliti.
acceptable to you? Is that acceptable?
I wasn't paying attention.
So in addition to the reporting on the implementation strategy, it would also be a consultation strategy for BIAs and affected property owners.
Are you moving that?
I would want to do that, and I would take it one step
Yes.
further and
I agree to that, yes.
properly bring some dialogue into community councils as opposed to the dialogue happening at City Hall. So community councils take it on as that dialogue, right? Well,
I think it's Councillor Lee's motion, though, you want to amend,
Yeah.
correct?
Right.
Is that okay?
Yes, yes, okay.
Councillor Lee agrees to that, so the clerk is going to amend the motion, and now we'll move to Councillor Mammoliti for his,
so just,
you've already spoken, but you.
yeah, just
modified.
in terms of what was acceptable to me, the community councils is acceptable as a part of that dialogue? No. A point of order? Community
Not
councils.
going to, the
Community
clerk is-
councils can take it on as the dialogue, right? As a part of the consultation?
No, we're being advised, no. It doesn't go to community council, it's a city council matter, Peewickham City Council.
So community councils can't take it on as a,
No, it's
as a way to consult with their communities on this policy?
No.
Unless you send it to city council, and city council requests the community.
Yeah, the only way to navigate that is to, at city council, when this report goes forward in November, to request that it go back to community council. That's the only, you can't do it from this body, you'd have to do it from city council.
These motions don't take it to council, just so you
Oh, yes, good point. This isn't going to council. This isn't going to council, this is just going right back to staff.
All right, so maybe we can work on trying to get it out to the communities so people don't have to come downtown to have to depute. That's why we don't get many people in the suburbs coming to depute on these things. So I'm good with changing this,
Okay, you want to
Madam
put that on
Chair.
the screen? Could the clerk put the
And I think
modified
everybody will be
motion?
happy with it. And the fact that it's not going to
Councillor
council will
Mammoliti.
make it better. So it's not going to council,
This is a new motion that
it's
we've
not going to
modified.
council. I was just told this is not going to council.
Okay, Councillor Davis,
I don't know why
please.
she comes and wants to just
I'm
take
not
over
sure
everybody and
myself.
everything. Like,
It's really
you know,
not
it's
appropriate.
kind of annoying.
So, and now we're going to vote. We've got a number of motions in front of us.
But I was told that this is not going to go to council in November. Is that accurate?
So you're replacing recommendation one that says
The clerk told me it's not going to council.
it's not that.
That this can happen.
We're just deliberating here about your question, Councillor Mammoliti.
It's his
I
amendment
like when people deliberate.
to replace recommendation.
What did Councillor Lee's, how does Councillor Lee's email, motion start?
Just the chain of transportation.
Yeah.
I just have to have it. I'm going to keep it at committee and we don't know. Okay, so it will be So this is two names.
Stephen, this is what happens when you're the lone wolf. Kind of disturb everything that's going on all over the place.
Has anybody moved the report?
No.
No, so this hasn't been moved yet, so this is fine.
Just moving these items, and nobody's moving the written.
All right, all right, okay.
Unless you say adopt item as amended.
So don't say that.
Yeah. I'm just amending the item with these two motions.
Okay, so we've got a number of motions before us to amend the item. And we're going to put them up, I think, in order of them being placed. It's not.
It's not. So council isn't going to receive this recommendation in the next council meeting. So we'll be able to.
As long as you don't adopt it as amended.
Yeah, we're just going to amend.
We'll be able to dialogue with the BIAs.
Yeah, that's right.
So we get clarity.
Unless somebody moves the adoption of the report will not go to council. Adopt the recommendation contained in the report will not go to council.
So we'll just move the amendments as everybody. So let's start with Councillor, whose is first? Councillor Mamalides is first, and then Councillor Lees. And Councillor Lees has been amended with Councillor Holliday's comments. So we've got Councillor Mamalides before us. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Councillor Lees with Councillor Holliday's amendments. Are they there? Yes. All in favor? That carries. And that's a wrap. We're going to move on to our next item. We have deputations on the next item, and we have to move these items forward. So the first speaker is Hamish.
This, I asked if you could switch, it's got to go. I don't know if you can.
Okay.
And these guys are fine with it, and that guy's not.
Okay. So this is preparing Toronto for electric vehicles, PW 24.7. I don't think we can. Okay. Hamish Wilson, you've got 5 minutes, Hamish.
Yes, good morning again. Thank you for this item and your time. I take climate change very, very seriously, by the way. And so with that aspect of the motivation behind this report, I think it's excellent. This is a little just an indication of how serious the issue actually is. The total amount of heat energy stored in the atmosphere for equivalent of Hiroshimas per second. It's a horrendous problem. It's really at the point of a climate emergency these days. So I totally take climate change very seriously. However, it does seem that anything to do with cars just sails right through, really gets fast-tracked, even though there are some real issues with electric cars because they're still cars, for instance. And now, one of the things that we also, in context, we tend to subsidize the vehicles pretty heavily already. This is an old stat from Vancouver, $2,700 per car per year, about 7 times the amount we subsidize transit. So that's about $2.7 billion a year worth of avoided costs that we manage to provide to automobility. And in terms of climate change, we're not doing very well. We're one of the worst in the world in some ways, and don't fool yourselves to think that Toronto's that green. We're not, in my view. I think we're fudging our emission stats a fair bit. Some of the electric vehicles, yes, it's going to be good to have electric vehicles, but they're still vehicles, though at times they're useful, especially as you get further out of the core city and for deliveries. In terms of overall issues with electric vehicles, the electric vehicle and the burden of history just came across recently, and there's a wonderful little passage, or a fairly good passage, and where's the copy to actually put on the, there we are. The social, financial, and environmental threats we face, and we now face as a result of our reliance on refined petroleum, are not the fault of internal combustion technology per se, but of the massive expansion of the automobile transport system. In this sense, the scale of the automotive technology system is most salient and potentially hazardous characteristics. So it's the scale. If we change the mode of propulsion, it doesn't mean to say that we still don't have massive problems. We do. So because we're dominated by the suburban areas that are car-oriented, this is how the core gets compromised. We still don't have anywhere near a good bike lane network, and bikes are a couple of orders of magnitude greener than an electric car. And what is a priority to fight climate change? I've been obsessed about climate change for quite a while, decades actually. The motivation for the bluer thing is actually from the 1992 study, and the motivation for the 1992 study was climate change as a result of the Changing Atmosphere Conference in 1988, which had a goal of 20% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2005, which basically we've blown through. I think we're not honest about what our emission levels are. So that came out with Bloor Danforth as being the #1 best place for a long bike lane, and that was motivated by climate change. We fast forward to the bike plan of 2001, and there's a little bit of Bloor that made it into that, let me move my finger there, between Sherbourne and Church that was in the 2001 bike plan.
Topic is it electric?
Absolutely, it's it's spending priorities. We have $50,000 to manage we found $50,000 to put into this electric vehicle and change things, and yet we have not found the $25,000 over 25 years to actually put in that little bit of bike lane on Bloor Street East, which is also transit relief. And in terms of actual overall energy efficiency, we have to be thinking of how can we improve the efficiency of our transit systems. And by providing a continuous bikeway along Bloor Danforth, it's a transit efficiency which equates with an energy efficiency. If you don't think that there's an issue with the transit, well, there is. There are horrendous issues. Bloor Yonge is horribly overcrowded, we're told. So in terms of actually having the sense of doing things with overall transport efficiencies, and transport leads our greenhouse gas problem in Ontario, and we're in some chronic denial here about...
Wrap up, please.
Well, I've still got 15 seconds. Thank you, I will. This is the priority that you should be doing, is that little bit of Bloor Street East between Sherbourne and Church that's been in your bike plan. It's kind of disgusting, really, that you haven't managed to do it yet.
Yes, Councillor Mammoliti, go ahead.
Yes, sir.
I see that.
Trying to figure out how this report ties into your deputation.
It's $50,000.
Yeah, I get that. So let's talk about how that might tie into your Bloor Street agenda. We're talking about, in many respects, driverless cars, whose objective it will be to find parking. And so they're computers and robots that are going to try to find parking. And along Bloor Street, I can see a whole bunch of these cars just circling, trying to figure out where all the parking spots have gone, because we've taken them away under your wish, I guess, with respect to Bloor Street and every other area that we take them. So would it not make sense to eliminate the bike lanes and put a hold on these driverless cars until we figure out how they're actually going to be driving around?
Thank you for the question.
Oh, no
because
problem.
quite honestly, the Bloor corridor and not so much the Danforth, but it is the best served corridor pretty much in terms of having off-street parking. If you go to the Green Pea site, that gives you an indication of just how many hundreds of other places there are off-street for car parking. And as a salient example of the proof of how unnecessary it is to have on-street parking on Bloor Street. When the Yorkville project was approved, which ran from Avenue Road over to Church Street, and that's some of the costliest real estate and the costliest rentals in the city, I believe, they agreed to remove the on-street parking because A, it was not necessary, and B, they wanted to have the extra space allocated to the public realm because they felt that there was adequate off-street parking with not only the provision of the subway, but all the off-street parking in the parking garages. So you don't need on-street parking on Bloor Street on top and parallel to the subway. It is unnecessary. So the driverless cars are really, you know, take other streets.
What you do need...
Before us.
I'm answering the question.
I'm speaking to both of you. The topic before us is this, PW 24.7, preparing Toronto for electric vehicles. So all we're doing really right now is wasting time because we're not to that item. It's before us, and we're not moving forward here.
No, I think with respect to how these cars move around, it is relevant to the deputant because the deputant wants a particular corridor in the city to look a particular way. We've taken away parking spots at the cost of the city, I might add. We've lost about $2 million in taking away those parking authority parking spots along Bloor Street. How is it that these robot cars are going to find parking if we've taken all the parking away?
On the subway corridor, if people want to come into the center of the city, I think they can get out of their car and take the subway. I think that's the most logical thing, and I would actually refer you to this book again, The Electric Vehicle and the Burden of History, and that particular quote, which suggested that, in fact, it doesn't matter about the mode of propulsion. It's still a whole system of automobility that is a problem. Every single car takes up space, takes valuable road space. That road space has to be drained to tie it into the previous item.
Do you think we should just bring the horse and buggy back?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Okay,
We should
that's it?
embrace bicycles.
All right, the next speaker is James Scarrow. Is James here in the, there we are. Welcome, James. I hope you're here to speak about electric vehicles. You've got 5 minutes. You can keep an eye on the clock there that I'm changing right now.
To speak about electric vehicles because I'm a new purchaser of an electric vehicle. I'm also a permit parker in Ward 29, and I was shocked to find when I called the city to ask for a permit to install a home-based charger at my own expense that I couldn't get a permit because such permits don't exist. And indeed, the infrastructure to support those permits doesn't exist either, and the city is not moving to put that infrastructure in place. So I was pretty interested when I learned about this pilot to supposedly prepare Toronto for EVs. I have news, the EVs are here now, and there's a tidal wave of EV purchases coming down the road as new models come out, and more people want these things. But this pilot is not addressing the real issues that are out there right now as they relate to EVs, and as the issues relate to EVs coming down the road soon. The first thing that this pilot doesn't recognize is the mandatory component of an EV charging strategy relating to home charging. Home charging is a mandatory component of any charging strategy, and permit parkers don't have the ability to charge at home. There's 53,000 permit parkers out there across the city, and we're effectively blocked from the electric car revolution. That's 53,000 City of Toronto citizens blocked from this revolution because they are permit parking holders. There's a need to home charge electric vehicles now. There, as I say, are going to be a large number of them coming. There's also transition issues associated with what we see now, which is a fairly sparse spread of electric vehicles over the permit areas. And that's going to transition fairly quickly to a much denser one. And this model that's proposed in this pilot does not address that issue either. It also doesn't address the issue of adequate funding for the large number of home chargers that are required now and those that are coming down the pike in this tsunami of electric vehicle sales that is coming in the next year or so with all the new models coming out and so on. And that means that this pilot needs to address alternate financing models that incorporate the realistic estimates of what the city can contribute to this issue. None of that's dealt with in this pilot, and as a result of that, this pilot is not preparing Toronto for EVs. It's not doing that at all. To be effective, a pilot must emulate and address the real issues that a practical rollout of home charging for electric vehicles would otherwise encounter. It means that we need a practical model for the near term, the current term, and the long term before we can talk about a pilot that is going to help electric vehicle owners in this city. I think if you're going to criticize an existing proposal, you have to get off your buns and produce an example of something that would meet those criticisms. And with that in mind, I wrote a proposal as a straw man, and I've sent that to Public Works and Infrastructure. And I would ask that Public Works and Infrastructure read that document seriously and compare it to their existing proposal and respond to it. In the next couple of days, I'm going to be talking to my council, I'm going to be talking to my MP, and I'm going to be talking to the industry associations dealing with electrical vehicles about the fact that large portions of this city are prevented from owning electric vehicles because they can't charge them at home without doubling or tripling the amount of charging time or transit time they have in front of them to use these cars. And as a result of that, I'm pretty close to having to cancel my purchase of an electric vehicle for this reason. And I'd hate to want to do that, believe me. I really don't want to do that. And I think the city should be encouraging people to use electric vehicles, not discouraging them.
Mr. Scarrow, so your time's up, but we have questions for you, okay? So you'll have a bit more airtime here. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming in and for your environmental passion. What, so one of your main problems is you don't have permit parking on your street.
No, I do have permit parking, and I am a permit parker today. I just can't charge my vehicle under a permit. I'm not concerned about the fact that I can't park the car in front of the house all the time. That's, you know, part of being a permit parker, and I bought into that when I bought a house downtown. The problem is I can't get an electrical connection down to the curb, even at my own expense, because there's no infrastructure that allows the city to give a permit that I can get a contractor to come in and do that. I have to run a cable from the house across a bit of public property under the sidewalk and across to the curb.
So what was your, sorry, what was your proposal you sent into the committee? I'm not on the committee, I didn't see that. Can you do it, give us like 5 sentences what it was about?
Basically, I'm suggesting that we need hydro drops on the poles. And the pilot is talking about that, but they're talking about putting a few here and a few there, and some of them down in public spaces like parking lots, at parks and so on. But they're not talking about making those drops available for people to purchase them themselves, because the city can only produce, you know, 5 or 6 of these things, and we have a large number of electric cars already in the permit areas. They're not recognizing the fact that permit holders need these chargers now, and they're willing to pay for them.
So your proposal is that the owner of the electric vehicle be allowed to pay for the infrastructure on city infrastructure or city poles or hydro poles?
These drops don't exist today, so the pilot needs to test that, but it needs to do so on a prompt basis so that we can figure out what the cost is and what the city is willing to do at cost and what Toronto Hydro is willing to do at cost to do their share of mitigating the premium of owning an electric vehicle.
Are there, to your knowledge, are there other municipalities that have what you're proposing, or?
No, I don't believe so. I think we're talking something fairly unique in Toronto with permit parking, because of the concentration in the city.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Councillor Holyday.
Hi, Mr. Scarrow. Thank you for speaking to us in a thoughtful presentation. We have about 500 pieces of correspondence in this particular PUIC meeting, so I'll have a look for yours. We do normally look at them when they come around.
If you like, I'll give you a copy after I speak.
I'll find it, not a problem. Okay. But I was curious. It's a very difficult issue you've brought up, and I wondered if you felt or thought that electric vehicle charging infrastructure should be a private thing, so a private homeowner like you. Is it something that should be public infrastructure, or do you think it should be a public or private commercial venture? Whether we own it or a private company owns it, should it be a commercial venture?
I think we need the flexibility to have the infrastructure financed by combinations of that. The private sector has already done quite a good job of dealing with charging at destination. And I'm talking about retailers and goods and service providers. The electric car vendors have done an excellent job of putting infrastructure out there for charging en route. Chargers all over the city, if you look at maps. And as for charging at home, there's a rebate available through Ontario, the province, to help mitigate the cost of putting a charger in your home. So there's, private-public partnerships going on all over the place. And that part of the charging infrastructure is doing quite nicely. But there's a hole in that, a gap relating to 53,000 people on permits, and nobody's dealing with it. And it's not that the permit holders don't want to pony up their share of that, it's just that the city needs to do their part.
So this is a very difficult issue because parking is very difficult in general. So one of the things that people have brought up, and I'm not necessarily saying it's your suggestion, but if let's say you're a homeowner and you are able to install your own private drop near your home to service the car, right? You run an extension cord or whatever it is. Let's say we reach that world. How do you deal with getting access to that parking space, knowing that parking spaces aren't reserved on the street? What if your neighbor parks there? What if your neighbor plugs into it?
That's one of the issues that the pilot doesn't address and I think has to be addressed. My example as a straw man does address it. The way I envisioned it as a way of opening to the discussion was that that one of the permit spots be used as a charging station for permitted electric vehicles only overnight. Now what that means is there's no permit spot lost because these are all permitted vehicles, electric or otherwise. But overnight, that particular slot is reserved for overnight charging of electric vehicles. And you put those only in neighborhoods where electric vehicles exist. Now, during the day, the spot reverts to normal usage, and anybody can use the spot regardless.
So it would be a spot reserved for a type of vehicle serviced by a drop, but that drop would have to be a public drop, not a person's private residence feeding that, I think.
It would be a public drop if the public were paying for it. It would be a private drop for those electric vehicles using it if the electric vehicle owners paid for it.
So there's the rub. So what if it's a private drop from someone's home? Would you advocate to reserve it for their car?
It would be from a pole.
So,
it would be on a hydro pole.
Okay, okay. And maybe just a basic question, would you recognize or concede that putting a drop on a pole might actually be a fairly complex thing to do if it's high voltage or it's not just a wire down the pole and an outlet, it might actually involve equipment?
I don't think so. We'd have to talk to the Toronto Hydro people, but
okay.
When you look at the poles, there's the high voltage wire across the top, and then there's a lower 240 phased wire below that feeds all the houses. And we're talking residential areas here.
Yep.
So yeah, there's a 240 volt wire
Understood.
Above, and so it's just a matter of connecting and dropping down.
And then paying for the electricity, how would that be done, or would the city be supplying that?
Well, interestingly enough, one of the reasons why the province has been interested in electric vehicles is because for overnight charging, you're charging with power that is essentially surplus power by Ontario
Understood.
Hydro because of the nukes. And in this case, again, we'd be using surplus power. And if that power was metered by Toronto Hydro, they could ask for reimbursement of that from Ontario Hydro as surplus power.
So metered at the pole, though, not just
at the pole, yeah.
Metered. Okay. The last thing is, I'm running out of time, and I want to be respectful of it. You just said one thing. You mentioned that Toronto Hydro should mitigate these costs. What role do you see for Toronto Hydro in this? It's distinct from the city, right?
Right.
What do you think their role is?
I think they need to design this drop and design it in such a manner that it is as inexpensive and simple as possible using the KISS principle, and to provide it at a cost, therefore, that is accessible to the individual or to groups of individuals when there's multiple EVs on the street that could use that charger, because you don't need to charge, or you do need to charge overnight, but you don't need to charge every night. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Mamalidi.
Thank you.
No, you're still on.
Oh,
he has a question for you.
I'm just interested in in how you get to where you want to be. In my opinion, this has been about the cart before the horse. Governments moving forward with policy, not understanding in getting to where the people that want to abide by the rules in getting there. In your case, you have a car, you have a house, and why is it that you can't charge your vehicle at your own house?
Because I don't have access to my private property. My vehicle doesn't have access to private property.
So you don't have a driveway?
No.
Okay. So you have a permit to park on the street?
Yes.
And why is that I guess the province who's allowed these vehicles and has defined them as vehicles on our streets, why is it that they're not coming to the table and paying for this infrastructure?
Well, they are.
How?
They're providing rebates for the purchase of the vehicle, rebates for the implementation of home chargers. So yeah, they're doing their share.
But not for the municipalities?
Well, I guess the municipalities have to do their share, and the city has to do its share too.
So that leads me to who's going to pay for it. And I'd like to know from you how many people actually own one of these cars.
Well, I'd like to ask the Public Works and Infrastructure Group whether they've actually done the work to determine where the electric vehicles are in the city, particularly on permitted areas. I think it's a good question.
It is, because there are many people that will have to pick up the tab, the municipal tab, at a ratepayer expense, and will say, why do I need to be paying for this kind of expensive infrastructure change if there's only a few people driving these cars?
Well, I think what we're doing, or what we're seeing right now, first of all, is not that Ontario is allowing these things. It's the world that is coming to our doorstep with these things. These things are here, and it's not because Ontario allowed it, it's because the market is pushing them. We're responding to that, and Ontario is responding to it. And yeah, the tsunami, as I call it, of electric vehicles that are going to come down the pike are going to result in the need for chargers that far surpass any infrastructure budgets that are out there. And that's why the model needs to be a mixed model that puts municipal money into getting the permitting and the administrative infrastructure in place so that the homeowner or the electric vehicle owner can step up to the plate and finance the
But you would agree with me
drop.
that we don't even know how many people own these cars in our city. And we're about to, I mean, if we were to accept your dialogue and your deputation, and we would ask the taxpayers to fund the infrastructure, it would be millions of dollars at the end of the day.
No, I don't think so.
And we don't even know how many people drive these cars in the city of Toronto.
No, I think the infrastructure, if it's paid for by the individual at cost, is only going to leave the administrative side to the municipality.
Are you aware of the cost that may be subject to you if you wanted to pay for it?
Well, the pilot description doesn't really talk about that much, but they do mention something about the cost of a drop being estimated at the moment at around $6,000.
No, it won't be 6,000. It's going to be 60,000.
What, to take a wire from 30 feet up and put it down?
Yeah, it will be a huge
I don't
cost.
think so.
It'll be a huge cost for a number of reasons. One, everything needs to be designed, okay, subject to where you want to put your car. Two, you have costs that you have to bear with respect to fair wage in the city of Toronto, and that brings another exorbitant amount of money. And I would venture to say that it will end up costing you anywhere between $50,000 and $60,000 just to do what you want.
I don't believe it. The reason why is because, first of all, we have to find a solution to solve this problem on a timely and costly basis. Doing it maybe the old-fashioned way might be that way, the dinosaur way, but we have to find a solution because these cars are here now. That's what I'm telling you. These cars are here now, so turning around and saying it's going to cost $60,000 to produce a drop is not solving the problem.
Would you pay for that if it did cost $50,000 or $60,000?
No, because I wouldn't believe that that's what it really costs.
All right, I'll ask staff that question later.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move now to questions of staff. And we have one question for staff. Councillor Mamalady.
So how many people drive these cars in the City of Toronto?
Through you, Chair, about 1,600 electric vehicles are registered in the City of Toronto as of last year.
And do we know where they are?
Ward 25.
Wow.
Through you, Chair.
You're the queen of
I am the queen.
electric vehicles.
That's correct.
Through you, Chair, there is a map
Other things
on
too.
Through you, Chair, there is a map on page 6 of the report. We found out for each of those vehicles the forward sorting area postal code and have mapped where the predominance of the use
And where are they? Sorry.
vehicles are. They're concentrated. My map doesn't show very good colors. There's a map here in your report on page 6. They do vary across the city with some wards have up to 230.
So the majority of them are where? In downtown? Or,
The highest amount are in Councillor Robinson's ward.
okay.
What do I say?
So I wonder how it got here on the agenda. Just curious. But
It's not true.
But I for one, would like to know with 1,600 vehicles, how we are venturing into having the taxpayer pay for the infrastructure associated to this. Why does my tax base have to pay for 1,600 people who are driving these cars?
Through you, Chair, we are looking at a small pilot, and the majority of the costs would be borne by Toronto Hydro as part of this pilot.
Hydro will cover all the costs, or is the municipality subject to costs here?
Through you, Chair, there are 2 pilots outlined in this report. One is for the residential residential EV charge stations, and the cost to the city is about $6,000 for that pilot program, which provides 7 EV stations, because we're just bearing the cost of signage and pavement markings.
How many people in York West drive EV cars?
I can have staff pull that number. York West. Which ward number?
Yeah.
Sorry, Ward 7.
So that's Ward 7 and Ward 8, or Ward 7?
22 in Ward 7.
So I would be asking the rest of Ward 7 who don't have one of these cars, if I vote in favor of this, I'm asking them to pay for this pilot project.
Through you, Chair, the cost of the residential EV charge station pilot would be $6,000 from the operating budget.
So the hundreds of thousands of other people that have cars and not EV cars are being asked to help pay for the 1,600 people that own these cars and this pilot project.
The cost would be borne by the operating budget, $6,000 for the residential EV station and about $40,000 for the urban EV stations.
So how much would it cost for someone like our deputant who wants to pay the cost to actually do that in front of their home? What's the actual cost? Is it $6,000, or are we looking at a higher number if somebody wanted to actually pay the costs of this?
The $6,000 is based on the signage and pavement markings related to EV charge stations in residential areas. The other costs related to that are covered by Toronto Hydro, so I would ask them to comment on the cost.
Don't we know?
And what that would be for an individual, I can't put a number on that myself.
We haven't asked Hydro how much that would be?
There are Toronto Hydro staff here that could respond about the cost overall to them, but I believe it's in the range for this pilot. It's if I can get a nod, in the range of $100,000 to $200,000.
Well, I would love them to come to the table, actually. Would I be able to ask Hydro a question?
Sure.
Yes, Toronto Hydro staff are here.
Absolutely.
I'm actually really glad you're here.
Mr.
Can I get all those? Can I get all those posts that have no?
Sit down now, thanks.
Can I get all those posts that are cut in half and have no wires attached to them removed in my community? Just while you're here. I'm just joking. How much would it cost if someone wanted to take power from your posts and put them on a boulevard area for this reason? What's the real cost?
Thank you for the question. Madam Chair, there's a number of issues associated with this. Right now, there are code regulations that prevent someone from bringing electricity from their home, crossing onto a public road allowance, and bringing that electricity there. And so the pilot is designed to tap into our system and bring electricity to a charging station mounted on the pole. This is a pilot, so the costs are not firm yet. We have to actually do it to understand. But I think what you'd be looking at safely to say it's a 5-digit number per location.
So I was accurate?
It'll be over $10,000.
Is it going to be 30,000? Is it going to be 40,000?
We'll see, but it is definitely not less than 10. I can say that with confidence.
So how is it that we're prepared to venture into a pilot project if we don't know the costs?
Well, we have an estimate of the costs, and it's location specific, and those locations are still being determined. So we do have an internal budget for it, which I think will cover it.
So we're looking at the city covering the costs of about $6,000 or $7,000, and then Hydro having to pick up the costs that are going to be more than $10,000.
Yes, the city's costs are in total.
We're already looking at $16,000 at the minimum.
The city's costs are in total. The number I quoted you is per location.
Yes, I get that.
I see.
But my question was, if the city's picking up a certain cost and then Hydro picks up another one, we are already at $16,000 minimum.
Yes.
Per location.
Okay.
Okay. So it's not going to be 10,000, is it? It's going to be higher than 10,000.
I said no less than 10. That's right.
So it could be 50,000.
I wouldn't go that far.
Could it be 40?
Could be.
So have we told constituents that have come here and given us dialogue today that that could be the cost if they wanted to absorb it themselves?
Your time's up.
I think the question and the proposal by city staff, which is governing how this program is supposed to work, is not open to individual people paying for a station on the public road.
This could be a city-borne cost, could it not?
That's for the city to decide. I can't comment on that.
Okay, that's it for that. Councillor Holyday, did you want to ask? Okay, go ahead.
And I don't know who needs to answer it, if it's city staff or Hydro staff, but in the experience in other places, and I think it even came up that there are commercial vendors essentially that run charging stations in the city. Is it reasonable to say that at some point there could actually be a money-making venture to get into the business of selling power to charge cars? Is that a reason? I know we're at the beginning in a pilot, but is that a possibility down the road that we could actually make money off of this?
Madam Chair, is that a question for Toronto?
Yeah, I didn't know if it was the staff or Hydro.
I'm not sure directions, so I wasn't
who's
sure
got the expertise
myself.
on this.
Through you, Chair, there are commercial vendors of EV charging, so there are vendors that would take that as a viable money-making opportunity. The city has, through the Toronto Parking Authority, some EV charge stations as a pilot, and then this would be a venture with Toronto Hydro.
Does
Okay.
that answer your question? Doesn't look like it did.
Sort of, but I'll accept the answer.
Can you ask more for more information offline?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So let's move to speakers. I know Councillor McMahon. Well, you have a question. I'm sorry, just 1 minute.
Sorry, I had a question, and I was outside.
Okay.
Sorry.
Just so you know, this is Hydro. This is Toronto Hydro before us. Go ahead.
But staff is answering too, or no?
Yeah, both. But just so you know, because I know.
I recognize Toronto Hydro, absolutely. So I'm just wondering why there's so few stations proposed. I don't know who that is. Staff?
That's staff. I asked.
Through you, Chair, because it is a pilot project and we want to understand the costs and the monitoring implications and any risks associated with the project, we want to start that on a small basis, and Toronto Hydro could speak further to that.
That's correct, Madam Chair. We want to understand a number of things, technical, parking-related usage, and 5 to 7 locations would enable us to understand that, to be able to do an effective increase in the program should it be warranted in the future. We want to get it right, and so we have the minimum number to get it right, and then we can carry forward.
Right, and just what concerned me was, should it be warranted in the future? And I think we all know it's going to be warranted. I guess it's a matter of how it's done, right? Not if it's done. So, and then how long? What kind of time frame are you looking at then, just to determine whether they're successful or not?
Madam Chair, 1 year is a minimum amount of time, and that's in the staff report. So we hope to report back with the city in 1 year's time.
And then you would roll out them colossally across the city should they be proven successful? Or you would do more pilots?
We'll have to see in 1 year's time. I can't say what we'll find in 1 year's time.
But you're keen on charging systems?
What I can say is that we have budgeted to continue this program into next year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and Councillor Lee's next.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This pilot that you're doing right now, will the users be paying for charging, and will you be bringing back, a report?
Through you, Chair, the residential on-street permit EV charging, they would be paying through their credit card on the street. The urban EV charge station, they would not be paying.
Okay. So as one of the applicants was asking, will there be a financial or alternative financial costing and all that brought back as part of this report after the pilot?
Through you, Chair, yes, the ability to fund any expansion of the pilot would certainly be addressed in the report.
Okay. Now, when in your report that says that there's 1,600 electrical vehicles in Toronto, are most of this right now doing at-home charging?
Through you, Chair, yes, about 80% of existing EV users charge at home.
Okay. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to move to speakers now. Thank you very much to Toronto Hydro for being here today. Councillor McMahon, would you like to, you had your hand up, would you like to speak on this matter? And then Councillor Layton.
Sure, thank you very much. And so I'm going to try and be positive, but it's great that this is moving forward and we're actually doing a pilot. And it seems to be a good partnership with Toronto Hydro. I would just say that it's pretty timid, and I know we want to get it right, but we are, Torontonians are keen on electric vehicles, and they're purchasing them, and they're feeling frustrated because they can't charge them. We're trying to move forward with a sustainable city. It's part of our Transform TO climate change adaptation plan, unanimously adopted by council. I'll remind councillors. So I'm just a little frustrated that we're not rolling out a lot more of these stations, but at least we're rolling out some, I guess.
And passionate. Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll try to be very brief. In 2011, I attended a workshop that Toronto Hydro put on. This was 6 years ago now, with Toronto Atmospheric Fund about this very subject. And this was at the very early stages of the uptake of EVs. It is incredible that we've gotten this far. I would have hoping it would have happened a little quicker. Let me put a scenario for you, 2 scenarios that occur quite frequently in my ward, which I'm very excited as part of the pilot. Tenants in buildings that are in areas of, like, these are in houses. Most of my houses are duplex, triplex. Tenants in buildings that don't or can't get permission or wouldn't put the investment into an on-site charging vehicle are now going to be able to access spots within the permit area that they can charge their vehicles. That is one important group. And don't like these tenants drive. All my areas are permitted almost to 100%, yet there's parking on site. But it's because we have subdivided these houses up. These are people that own cars, that some own cars, not a ton, but some own cars. That this will offer them an opportunity to do a lower carbon switch. I should say first, the only solution to our future transportation issues that our city will be facing is getting people out of their cars. There is no doubt in my mind. However, there are instances where individuals, because of their work, because of accessibility issues, because of any number of other things, won't be able to access public transit or walk or take a bicycle. I acknowledge that. We're not going to be able to do this switch immediately. We're going to need to figure out steps that we can ensure that individuals that are either tenants and can't do the equipment upgrade on their premises, or the other side of it is individuals that don't have parking, that just simply don't have parking or don't have access to a parking spot on their site. We don't allow new parking pads in Ward 19. We haven't in 15 years. And I'm not going to be the first to start changing that. So this offers an opportunity for individuals to switch over. There are problems with the pilot. I agree. If you're charging at a station, you should probably be the one paying for those electrons. If you're, we should be able to go to a dedicated spot scenario where in an overnight, I think that's a great idea, in the overnight times, that those spots be reserved for EV vehicles to ensure that people can actually recharge them and access those spots. There should be 2 spots at every drop. As far as I'm concerned, if you can put a spot on both sides, you should go ahead and do that. These are good steps forward. I just spoke to staff about this, the issue that Councillor Holyday just brought up, that some of them will be paying and some of them won't. My understanding it's because they're trying a couple different things. They're using the pilot opportunity to use different kiosk systems and see what works and what doesn't. I was pleased to know that some of the residential ones will be individuals paying for them, so that we are recouping some of the cost here. But I think we need to remember it is a pilot. We're only doing some stations. This is a shift that's going on globally. We need to be in front of it, and this is one of those good reports that timidly puts our toe in the water, but actually gets us on our way into the pool.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This is a pilot, and like Councillor Layton, I did go to Dundas Square to look at the charging vehicles when Toronto Hydro was doing it. And right now, the infrastructure is not in place to handle everyone. But when we make individually a decision to buy one of these electric vehicles, we have to be aware of the limitations. So we cannot expect the government to just come forward and pay for putting infrastructure in just because we make our decision to buy an electric vehicle. But this pilot will actually come out with a report that will quantify how much it will cost to allow this to happen. I even have questions about the capacity of hydro to generate enough electricity to be able to power everybody that's going to convert from gasoline to electric vehicles. I also question things such as, right now we are paying a gasoline tax. As the use of gasoline goes down, what are we going to use to replace the revenues coming from gasoline tax? That's paying for much of the things like highways, building roads. So we have to think about this long term as well as medium term and short term, as one of the deputants was saying. So although we look at the greening of our planet, and it's a commendable thing to do, and it's the right thing to do, we also have to think about the changing environment that we're in. So I'm going to be supporting the pilot going forward so we can get numbers back, we can get financial models that could work for us in the future. So thank you very much, staff, for bringing this forward. Thank you.
So this is what happens when you put the cart by the before the horse? Yeah. The City Council requested General Manager Transportation Service to recuperate the costs relating to the pilot project from charges to users of the charging stations. And someone has to bring this forward on behalf of the taxpayer, because this is ridiculous what's happening here. 1,600 cars in the City of Toronto, and we are now looking at changing infrastructure without even knowing the costs associated to what we're about to do. I've asked staff the question on the city level. They say it's $6,000. Hydro, by the way, hydro, if anybody hasn't been watching the news, is one of the biggest issues in the City of Toronto and in this province. People do not want to keep paying the rates associated to what's going on in their own homes. And this today tells me why. Because we are prepared now to even ask Hydro to absorb the costs associated to this. And they can't even tell us how much that's going to be. They've narrowed it down. They said it's going to be at least $10,000 and could be $40,000. So let's take those numbers for a second. Because if we're looking at 1,600 vehicles and we're looking at $40,000, we're talking, this pilot project could potentially cost the taxpayers about $70 million, $65 million. And if someone can dispute that, I'd like them to do that right now, because I don't think you can. We're venturing into a policy that we don't even know how much it's going to cost, and we're doing it for 1,600 vehicles in the City of Toronto. And who's paying for it? The people that don't want to pay for these ventures. The people that say, we've had enough. We don't want to keep paying City Hall for these ventures. And so what my motion does, Madam Chair, is it says you want them, pay for them. You want the infrastructure for your 1,600 vehicles, pay for it. And that's the appropriate motion that I think taxpayers would want moved under this scenario. I'm not saying defer it off. I'm not saying kill it. I'm saying if this is becoming a real big issue, we've heard from a deputy that said he's prepared to pay the costs associated to parking in front of his house. Let them pay the costs. Why is it that the taxpayer has to pay? Whether it's through the municipal level of government or whether it's through Hydro. And Hydro, just a message to you, you can't keep doing these sorts of things. People are sick and tired of the costs associated to their bills every month. And if you're prepared to pay $40,000 in a pilot project, it's no wonder everybody's so upset at Hydro. I'm yelling, and I'm not yelling. I am very emotional. I'm an Italian. We do this stuff. We get emotional in our living rooms. Every time we open up a Hydro bill, Italians get upset. Every time a Portuguese person opens up a bill, they get upset. You know why? Because it's us down here thinking that we can just do what we want. And say for 1,600 vehicles, we're about to venture into something that doesn't even make sense, and we don't even know the costs of it. This is ridiculous.
Motion is a broad sweep again, in that you're asking to recoup the entire cost and charge that back to the user, the entire cost, like not just flatlining it, making sure. So would it maybe not be a better approach to make sure that anybody who participates pays, no matter where you live in the city, versus this broader thing that seems maybe a bit cumbersome and impossible to do this, try to, to recuperate every single cost related to this program?
Madam Madam Chair, if you can tell me the actual costs to the taxpayer, then I will withdraw my motion. But you can't, and this could cost $65 million to the taxpayer.
What I'm saying is, would it not be better to charge the users of the pilot, using, you know, part and parcel of the pilot, charge all the users for just the use, not for the whole program?
No, for 1,600 vehicles, you want to charge these things, you pay for it. And I want a recorded vote on my motion as well.
Okay, we have Councillor Holyday with a motion and to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a similar motion, and I appreciate the inspiration from Councillor Mammoliti about charging people on this. And it's simply to make sure that all of the charging stations charge the user for the service. The reason why I move this is I think we should be charging all of the users and learning from that experience as part of the pilot. My concern is that the return on investment on, say, $10,000 that we hear is the installation charge may be longer than 1 year. And that's an awful lot of electricity to sell for $10,000. So it's a slightly different motion, slightly different approach. I'm very interested in the provision of these charging services. I suspect there may be some opportunity for the city to make money here, but we won't know that until we try this out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Holyday. I'll move the recs in the report. Thank you to staff, especially, well, Toronto Hydro for their participation in this, but also our city staff, our transportation staff who have worked hard on this. Many thanks to all of you, and it's long awaited. And so I will be moving the staff recs, but I will be supporting Councillor Holyday's motion, which seems reasonable to me to make it fair across the board. I will not be supporting Councillor Mammoliti's motion, which would be simply impossible. The cost would be too much for anybody to bear, so then that would kill the pilot. All those in favor? So we would, Councillor Mammoliti has asked for a recorded vote on his item.
So all those in favor of the motion before you from Councillor Mammoliti? Councillor Mammoliti. All those opposed? Councillor Carmichael Grab, Councillor Holyday, Councillor Robinson, Councillor Lee. That motion does not carry.
The next motion is Councillor Holyday's. Again, this is an amendment to the report. Okay, all those, do you want a recorded vote or just a vote? Okay, so all in favor, opposed, that carries unanimously.
Item as amended.
So the item as recorded vote on what? Oh, on the item, Okay, the item as amended, Councillor Mammoliti's asked for a recorded vote.
All those in favor of the item as amended, Councillor Carmichael Greb, Councillor Holyday, Councillor Robinson, Councillor Lee. All those opposed, Councillor Mammoliti. That motion carries.
Thank you very much. That leaves us to our last item before we get to the big one. And hopefully we can do this quickly. We have one speaker, Darnell Harris. If Darnell, you could come back to the podium. You've got 5 minutes, Darnell.
Just to speak very briefly about this, and first I'll go back to Councillor Mammoliti's comments on the other motion. When it comes to, for example, the stormwater infrastructure that we do have in the city, we certainly don't ask people to manage the pipes that are underneath, especially when you have this sort of infrastructure here. You are in fact replacing them. You're in fact replacing pipes. You don't have to have the sort of pipes that you'd have to have before. You don't have to be sucking items out of them. And therefore, there's no reason that we should be having BIAs pick up that sort of cost. In any case, in the conversation about the freight strategy, in fact, does not deal with the other ways in which we can get goods around the city, especially in terms of the last mile. All of that is something that has been spoken about by council and by staff at length. This here is actually a cargo bike that is run by UPS. It can hold up to half a ton of goods. It's completely enclosed. I had a picture of one I had earlier. And UPS is very blunt about why they use this sort of equipment. It's because, frankly, it saves them a hell of a lot of money. They don't have to be paying transmission costs, they don't have to be paying gas, they're not looking for parking, they're not picking up parking tickets. It's quite efficient, it does not take up the same road space, and in fact offers a consistent sort of trip. Now, the only difference, of course, is this has a width of about 1.3, 1.4 meters, but is a lot more practical. And at no point does the freight strategy that we discuss in the staff report deal with this at any length. This is a considerable problem because in terms of where we need to be moving with last mile deliveries and so forth, a lot of that is something called spoke and hub delivery, where you bring your goods to a particular warehouse in an area and then you're able to get it out with the local through these sort of devices. Now, in terms specifically, for example, I'll return to Finch briefly. I've in fact spoken to the BIAs along the route. I've spoken to the businesses, and this is something they're quite interested in because, again, it saves a lot of money. And again, this is something the framework has not considered. It also dovetails really well with the RAC, residential apartment commercial zoning discussion that has been had and supported by City Council. Because a lot of that discussion effectively says these tower communities, you're able to have businesses there. So I'll speak to something on Jane Street at Steeles. You have the Black Creek Community Farm. It's a wonderful place for people who've been there. They have a working farm there. What they don't have is a sewer connection. So that would cost about $500,000. That's not something they can particularly afford. And they're dealing with a working farm, and when they have to deal with their goods, they have no kitchen to process it in. The new RAC zoning would allow you to build a kitchen next door, but you still have the trouble of how you're getting your goods there as well as how you're getting it throughout the community. This sort of device is a lot cheaper to acquire, a lot cheaper to maintain, and in fact lowers the critical fixed costs of businesses. So many countries around the world, including the US, starting here, there are couple companies who use them as much as is possible already in Toronto, and there's no reason we shouldn't be pursuing these things as well. So specifically, and this is somewhat related to the last motion, but in reference to this, I would ask that the committee have staff do two things. One, make sure the freight strategy considers cargo trikes like this as part of their framework going forward. And the second thing relating to these sorts of approaches, which again save space and save money, that integrated green infrastructure be used as a stormwater barrier and be configured to carry a high volume of freight through local communities. So that is all through the chair, and I'm open to questions.
Again, a particular heading in a report that sounds nice, but what it really means is we're looking at if your vision comes forward with this report, fridges, mattresses, televisions, bulk items being put on bicycles and being brought down the middle of the road.
Not middle, no.
No, on bicycle paths.
Paths, mobility pathways that are usable for multiple people. So it's not just, certainly not just cyclists. You know, that's not what we're talking about here.
Well, we are actually. The report does talk about it.
Fair enough. That's not what I'm talking about here. It's really a range of sort of things, cargo bikes and other things that can use the same infrastructure.
Right, cargo bikes would be using the bicycle lanes for the carrying of all the bulk items that I just mentioned.
Yes, they could be used for that, and they're already used for that in some parts of Toronto.
They do that in third world countries, don't they?
They also do that here.
Oh, where?
Toronto.
Yeah?
They use them. In fact, this morning, the Pembina Institute is having the Drop Delivery, which is a company in Toronto, which uses this up on Finch. to in fact speak about how they use it and the potential for businesses. And again, this is something that I've spoken to all the BIAs.
And all the BIAs agree that they want a third world country brought into their community?
I'm not sure what you mean by that, to be honest.
I mean all the bulk items, mattresses, everyone's dirty laundry, everybody's washing machines on bicycles being brought through communities through bike lanes. That's what I mean.
Well, I think you can appreciate, for one, that in something like that, there's no way anyone is seeing anything. Now, of course, in terms of what happens in countries around the world, people also walk in countries around the world, and we consider that acceptable. For that matter, they also drive around the world. But again, I mean, in terms of businesses, their goal is to make money. The UPS, I think we can agree, is a very successful business, which makes quite a lot of money. And what they do in that way is they're very, very clear to state that they can carry goods through this manner throughout cities and throughout areas much more successfully. And what it also does for people who need to take vehicles, especially along Finch, which is a high-level freight corridor, as you know, is that it in fact allows them more road space, because therefore they do not have to have these sorts of local deliveries competing with their access to Highway 401.
Would you agree with me that if, by the way, I don't think this thing's going to be approved, but if it is, something like that would mean for a much larger width on our bicycle lanes, would it not? We'd have to redo our vision for bicycle lanes in the city.
It certainly deals with a different calculation, in that right now it's mostly a conversation of, a gentleman picking up his latte on the way to the beach. And the calculation is mostly based on that sort of exercise vision. It's a much different discussion when you're talking about moving a volume of freight, a measure of freight, out of a vehicle and putting it into a different sort of vehicle. So it could in some areas mean that. It might not necessarily mean that, of course. But it also, because you're dealing with a different sort of vehicle and different sort of calculation, does not inconvenience drivers. In fact, it makes life a lot easier for people who do need to do that.
To speak.
Go ahead.
Just a quick question. In the first paragraph of the summary, it just mentions that Toronto is a preferred destination for commercial, residential, and recreational development. It says nothing about industrial. Should that be included in there? Are we still keeping up with industrial development?
Through you, Chair, yes, we can certainly add that. It is bucketed under commercial, was my understanding, but I think it makes a lot of sense to call that out specifically.
Okay, that was all.
We've got them.
Question.
Okay, Councillor Mamalady and then Councillor Lee.
Are we talking about bicycle lanes and mattresses and fridges and all of that coming through that corridor? Is that what this report is talking about?
Through you, Madam Chair, the report is actually trying to develop a freight and goods movement strategy for the city, which would articulate and identify, amongst other things, first and last mile destinations, distribution, doing a scan of best practices across major cities that deal with time issues and delivery issues. Okay, so all of those things, lane configurations, design standards, et cetera.
The answer to my question is yes.
No, it's not about cycling. If there's last mile delivery, we know, for example, that UPS is engaging in a pilot to look at certain deliveries. Typically, it's small scale deliveries.
So this has nothing to do with
nothing to do with bike lanes.
Being used in bicycle lanes for the delivery of commercial goods. UPS on bicycles to be using our bicycle lanes for that purpose.
I would say that it is the intention of this report is to develop a freight and goods movement strategy. Part of that is last mile from the distribution point to the either commercial business, if it's small enough and the purveyor like UPS wants to do that.
So the answer to my question is yes.
It could include that as a
because earlier you said no. The answer is yes, I'm right.
It's not about bike lanes as per se. Last mile distribution could happen in a bunch of different ways. It could happen in a car.
I asked a specific question.
Okay.
If this goes through, would we be looking at people using our bicycle lanes to transport commercial goods?
They can do that now.
This legitimizes it, and it allows for a much larger, people are laughing, but this city's going to rat it. And people can laugh all they like, but this is what's happening, right? I mean, we're looking at the possibility of our commercial vehicles no longer being commercial vehicles that have motors on them. We're looking at bicycles being our commercial vehicles as well.
Okay, thank you.
The answer to the question?
I think that distribution and commercial carriers make decisions about the most effective way to transport their goods. And if they choose to transport them via bicycle because it makes sense for their business decisions, then that's up to them to make that suggestion. If they choose to do it with a semi-truck, then that's up to them to make that decision. I think that the region has done a really strong job in creating freight networks, and we look to our partners at Peel and the Toronto Board of Trade and the Pembina Institute who've done a lot of work at articulating freight and good strategies, and we would like to fill in the gap, which is Toronto.
To speak, Madam Chair.
Okay, sorry, unfortunately you can't clap. No, there's no fun here. All right, we have other questions. Councillor Lee, we're running out of time. We only have a few minutes before we break.
Yep. Thank you very much. And actually, before questions, let's move. I'd like to move to finish this item before lunch.
That's a great idea.
Okay. So.
That is moved. All in favor? That's fully supported. Councillor Holyday, I believe you have a motion.
Okay. My question to Madam Chair is to, now, I remember that I received email in August that basically said that oversized loads do not require police escorts. Is that confirmed?
Through you, Madam Chair, that is correct. That came into effect as of August the 1st of this year.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Let's have Councillor Lee start. He had his hand up first. Let's just change things up a bit. Councillor Lee.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And if not mistaken, this item came forward because last year I did put a letter in to ask for looking at the movement of goods and freight. And one of the my companies in my area had very strong concerns about the costs of moving their oversized loads through city streets because they required police escort. Whereas outside of the 416 area, it did not require police escorts. So I started looking at it all, as is, and with the Vision Zero mandate of making our streets safer, it's better to have a strategy in place to allow our industries to move their goods around in an efficient manner so that it will help reduce the cost and in turn will help reduce the cost of their goods to the consumers. So, and when our general manager of transportation joined, I was informed that many other cities in the world do have this kind of strategy to help companies move the freight around, especially when there is a cross-modal. You know, a lot of our goods come through the St. Lawrence River, St. Lawrence Seaway. A lot of it comes on rail, and then it gets transferred on the trucks, and then gets shipped to the distribution depots and so on. So it is a good thing to review this and come up with this strategy. So I am very happy that this is coming forward, and we just received a letter from TIN, Toronto Industry Network, that fully supports this. So I am glad that this is moving forward, and I fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Councillor Holyday. Do you mind? Because he has a motion. Do you have a motion?
Point of privilege, or point of order, or point of whatever. What happens with the recommendations here? It says to receive. So what happens if somebody remove the staff report as is?
To add, if someone moves a motion or an
I
amendment?
believe staff are asking for this to be received.
Yeah,
It says report for
it's
information.
an information report.
That's a receipt motion, is it not?
Yeah, that's exactly what's before us.
So there is no policy moving forward with this,
That's correct.
if this goes through the way it
It's
is?
a report for information.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a very, very brief request, and that is simply to ask Transportation to look at heavy truck prohibitions in residential areas as part of their framework review. It's an item that I receive complaints on from time to time about the movement of large vehicles through areas, and there's questions around why those trucks are there. And if there's any opportunity to improve that system of prohibition, I hope that we have a look at it. I talked to staff, they're comfortable with including this dimension in their review.
Thank you. Any other speakers? And so we're just adding, I've got a motion to add the word industrial. Councillor Carmichael Greb alluded to this. This is TIN's request that we just, even though the general manager has indicated it's really part and parcel commercial, they feel more comfortable with it pulled out. So I'll do that on behalf of Councillor Carmichael Greb and TIN. Councillor Mamali, did you want to say something?
I'd be stupid if I didn't want to say something. And I would not be representing the Torontonians if I didn't say something here. And I don't know why this committee isn't seeing what's happening here. I get the concerns, Councillor Holliday and others, with respect to the large goods and trucks and what's going on in our communities. But don't you see that other people are seeing this as an opportunity? You just heard from staff saying, yeah, it can be about bicycle lanes. Yeah, this report can mean commercial goods in those bicycle lanes. It could mean that our constituents will be carrying the mattresses and the fridges and all of the things that come along with that in our bicycle lanes. This report legitimizes that. Can't you see that? You know, I really can't wait for the next administration, because I hope to God I'm a part of it, because I'm going to eliminate and try to eliminate everything that we're doing down here at City Hall right now. It is ridiculous what's going on with these bicycle lanes and everything else associated to it. Now, because we have given the go-ahead, even on Bloor and everywhere else with bicycle lanes, we are now having staff saying it's legitimate for you to be bringing your laundry and open mattresses and fridges and everything else down the middle of the street. It reminds me of China. It reminds me of no, it does. And it reminds me of certain countries in South America that just bring it forward for the other reasons. They can't afford the vehicles, so they're using them. Now we want to bring a third world country into the city of Toronto, and you know why? Because we've allowed it. We've opened the doors to these bicycle lanes. And now everyone else is going to be using it as a corridor to travel. I can't wait for the next administration so somebody like me can eliminate everything that we're doing right now.
Okay, so we have a number of motions before us. We're going to go through them as per the clerk's order. So the first one is Stephen Holliday's. All those in favor? Against? That carries. The next motion is, I think, maybe mine, and this is just adding the word industrial to the first paragraph of the staff report. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Is that it? That's it. Thank you. So we are finished. We will resume this committee.
Could I ask just...
Receive means to do nothing, and we've amended it.
Oh, so that's different. Can I move the report, please? I'd like the opportunity to move the report with a recorded vote.
The other two motions carried, so the report can't be moved.
But I'd like an opportunity to vote on the report as amended.
As amended.
And with the recommendation of staff.
The report's been amended, so you want to put a motion on the table to move the recs of the staff report. that will be considered redundant because we've adopted the other amendments. Okay, so. No, it's redundant. We can't vote on that. That motion's redundant. The other two motions carried. The amendment carried.
Okay, on that note, we will conclude and resume at 1:30.
Just have, Chair, if it was all right, I just, with, of course, it's in the committee's hands. We have 2 kids who have taken the day off school to be here, hoping to return after lunch. I wonder, with the committee's indulgence, if we could just hear from them so that they can go back to school. It's okay?
No school. Okay, on that note, we've concluded. Somebody should tweet that. I think our work is done here.